Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Your Dose, the podcast which shares stories of lived experiences to help people feel less alone and more connected. Today, I am joined by Ryan Gatsby, an activist and survivor with an incredibly powerful story. Ryan shares his journey of overcoming the trauma of child sexual abuse, physical and emotional abuse, and the challenges of finding his voice amongst it all. From the depths of his darkest moments to becoming a hope for others, Ryan opens up about how he turned his pain into purpose through activism, storytelling, and educating communities about abuse prevention. It's a raw and heartfelt conversation about resilience, advocacy, and the power of vulnerability. Thank you so much for being here. I really do hope you enjoyed this episode. I am honoured that Ryan came on to the Yodos podcast and in person as well. If you are listening to this on Spotify, you can also find this on YouTube. If you want to watch the full episode on a bigger screen. And if you are here still, please remember to leave a review. It helps so much and allows me to get incredible guests like Ryan on the Yodos podcast. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Ryan. Welcome to the Yodos podcast.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a long time waiting.
It has.
Spoke on Instagram for ages about setting something up, so it's good to finally.
I know. It's an actual honour, which I said before, for you to be here. For the listeners, do you want to give a bit of a background of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Ryan Gatsby. I'm an activist. I have a story that is quite, I'd say, unique, but also not unique in its way. It's a widespread issue, but I feel like the way I tell it and some of the things that happen after my story, which we'll get into, are quite unique. I think that's what captivates people online and sort of, has brought people's eyes to my story, and the way that I speak about it has sort of just intrigued people. So, do you want me to just go straight into my story? So I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. I was sexually abused from the age of 8 to around 12, 13 years old. It kind of faded out, and then I was physically and emotionally abused from the 12, 13 till I was 16 years old, where I nearly ended my own life, but instead went to the police. So in an overall wrap, that's what happened.
Yeah.
But it was my stepdad, who was someone who came to our life when I was so young that he became our father figure. We called him Dad. Everyone thought he was our dad. It was that sort of relationship. Previous to my stepdad being around, our dad, our biological dad, wasn't really around as much. We'd see him like Christmas and birthdays, that type of thing. So I'd never really understood what a father and son relationship looked like, but I'd always see my friends playing with their dads, and I think, that's something that I want. Or I'd watch films and I'd see that relationship and think that's something I want. So when our stepdad came into our life, which was through a local church, my mum started going to the church, I think, because she felt quite alone. She was a single parent. We didn't have a lot of money. Yeah. There were a few times that we nearly got kicked out of our house, and literally my mum had nothing. So I think she sought that community feel and someone to sort of lean on. So we started going to this local church, and that's where we met him. And my first ever memory of him was him offering me extra biscuits at the end of the service. And I was like, I remember it so vividly, even now. And even as a kid I thought, it's a bit weird. Because he didn't go to anyone else or talk to anyone else, he just came straight to me. And I remember just him focusing on me around that time, he'd sort of smile at me across the church and stuff like that. And then anyway, one day he asked my mum for her mobile number to go on a date. And when they set this date up, he said, you can bring your kids as well. So we went on this first date to KFC, which I was it's a classy establishment in here. It was splashing out. But, it was really awkward. But anyway, it was so, just the first date happened, a few days later, we were all so quick, within 6 months we were basically living with him, within 12 months they were married, like that. And during that time, our relationship was really strong, and everyone sort of spoke about me as the spoiled child. That's what people used to say, because he would just spend a lot of money and a lot of time with me, and people saw that really quickly. And the first time the sexual abuse ever happened was in the shower. as a kid, I was like really scared of water. It was just like a naturally ingrained
something you
thing.
always
Yeah,
had,
like
yeah.
absolutely terrified. Like my family tell me now, like whenever you get into the bath or shower, you'd absolutely scream the house down and like, yeah.
And
it
how
was
old
just
were you at this point, if you don't mind me asking?
So I was about 8 years old.
So this was
Yeah.
when it started at 8, yeah.
Yeah. And we started sleeping over at his house, like I said, and it came to bath time, and obviously I was terrified, like I always was. And he became like my best friend, someone really close to me, really quickly, like I said. So he was like, oh, I can help Brian in the shower. That's what he said to my mum, and he built such a trusting relationship in it. It was like a pillar of a community type as well. So I think my mum trusted in him a bit too much, a bit too quickly. Like he ran the children's groups at church. He was like a reader for the church. Like the centre of the party always. So that kind of, he wasn't just like some strange guy. Everyone thought they knew him. So my mum was like, oh, that'd be amazing, because she saw how strong our relationship was as well. And then yeah, that's the first time the sexual abuse ever happened. And he told me this is what dads do, because he knew my dad hadn't been in my life. Right. So he used that against me in a sort of way, and he used that messaging it against me.
Do you think you felt loved by him, or was this like the first time maybe like you felt what it would be like to be loved by a father figure almost?
I think so, yeah, and I think as well, like my mum is an amazing like woman, like she's so nice, and I've never seen her be mean to anyone ever. Like she's so nice, but she's quite vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for her when it was just her, me, and my sister Megan, because she didn't have much support, so she couldn't put all her attention on us. And I think as a kid, if you don't feel seen, that's like the danger zone, because if you are seen by someone and it's the wrong person, then that's how they can groom you. And sadly for me, that's what happened. I didn't feel seen as a child. So then when someone did see me, I was like really trusting, and I trusted every word that he said.
And after that initial first incident in the shower, how often did it occur after that? So
as we were still staying at his house at that time, it was pretty much any time that he would shower me, when we like, I think we would say like once or twice a week. So that's how it sort of started. When we moved in, it became like almost every day. So every time I went in the shower, which was most evenings or after school, it would happen. If my nan stayed over, she would stay like in their bedroom and he would sleep in my bed, so it would happen then. And like he just said like some awful things that now, I didn't realise the severity of it then, but now I'm older, I kind of do. And like one time I was sort of resisting what he was trying to do, and I was like, I just want to go to sleep, like I've got school tomorrow. When my nana was staying over, this is when. And it was near Christmas, and he said to me, do you want to know what I got you for Christmas? And like he was basically saying, if you let me do this, then I'll tell you what I've got you for Christmas. So it was like so dark, so how his brain worked.
As well,
yeah. And like it's kind of sickening when I reflect back on it, that I saw that as like a good deal. Like, oh yeah, like
of course,
I want to know what I'm gonna get, and because I didn't understand the extent to what was happening, and it wasn't like, not to get in detail, but it wasn't like rape. It wasn't something that hurt, and it wasn't something that I thought that was extreme. I feel like I had the idea of what sex sort of was, or like what rape was. Maybe a bit later on, like when I was probably 10, 11, I sort of knew those kind of topics. But my explanation of what those things were, it wasn't that. So no one had directly told me that the things that he was doing was wrong, and that's what I feel like is needed more. Because I said this in the last podcast I did with Tom's Talks, but like if someone would have came directly to me and said, if someone touches your penis while touching their penis, then that's wrong. Yeah. Then I may have been like, yeah. Or if multiple people in my life would have given me that same messaging, then maybe I would have realised how wrong it was and spoken out sooner.
What point did you realise that it was wrong? And also you mentioned that it went from sexual abuse to physical and emotional. At what point did it change, and why do you think it changed? Yeah, so in those years where it was sexual, it was such a on the outside it was a very happy family, and because I didn't understand the full extent, I felt like at the time it didn't really affect me. And I always say that I was like someone who
didn't show, a kid that didn't show signs, because I didn't, like I said, I didn't understand the full extent of it. But when I did start to realise what was happening was wrong, it was around that time, sort of 12, 13, before it began fading out. And I remember I watched this documentary about this girl who'd been through like horrific abuse, and she'd developed like serious mental health issues.
Yeah.
And it was called like The Demon Child or something like that, because of how bad her behaviour and mental health was. And then when they were covering...
Oh my gosh, I think I know which one you mean. That's a really famous story, actually.
Yeah. I think, it is. It's on the full documentary was on YouTube, because that's where I watched it. And I remember seeing that, and like the way she described the sexual abuse, I was like, that's kind of like what's been happening to me.
Wow.
And then just through being at school and hearing people talk about like, you know, like people make jokes like, oh, you're a nonce and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a proper joke in like British schools. And so I was like, oh, what does that really mean? And then looking into it, I was like, oh yeah, I've been abused. And then it was such a like conflict in my mind, because I'm like, on one hand, this is my dad, who's took me on holidays, like changed our life really, because he was a lot more wealthy than us. And he'd done all these things, and we had all these memories like going abroad for the first time, going to loads of different holidays, having this nice space to live in. And then on the other side was, but he's not a good person because he's done this. And it was like, which one is he? Because...
You were so conflicted.
Yeah, and I'm like attached to him as my dad, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I hate him because I know what he's done now. So it was a real trap, and then it like built up and caused me like absolute stress in that time. And then I just came to him one day and I was like, I know what you did to me when I was younger, this was after it faded out, was wrong. And his face just absolutely dropped, and that was the first time he was physical with me.
And what age was that then? 12 that you...
Around, yeah, it's hard to remember exactly, but I feel like it was around maybe 12, 13, around that sort of time it was. And that's when it started to become more emotional and like physical abuse, and there were no sexual abuse after that. But I can't pinpoint the exact time it stopped, because it was strange how it faded out.
Yeah, and there's probably parts of it that you've forgot because it's traumatic,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So you have one sister,
Mm.
and obviously your mum.
Yeah.
Do you think they noticed any signs at all?
I think they thought, particularly my mum, I think she thought some things were strange, because even when I was at 12 years old and the sexual abuse was happening, like before it faded out, he was still coming into the bathroom. And that's not an age where that happens.
Not at all, no.
So I think at that point, she saw that there was something off with that, and I remember she would like come to the door and like knock and go like, oh, how long are you going to be? Or she'd like stand and shout and stuff and say like, oh, are you going to be any longer in there? And I just remember it. To me that seemed like suspicion, but she's never said it to me. She said she always had no idea. My sister was like, she's only like a year and a bit older than me,
Right,
so she was a child as well, but she was never sexually abused, deeply emotionally abused by him, bullied by him, like every day.
So she saw that side to him, so do you think it was a shock to her when you spoke out about what happened?
I think for my sister, she'd seen that he was an awful man, especially as we got older, because that, like I'll go into, that change happened in his personality. It's like once he was in, he could reveal his true self. So she was shocked about the sexual abuse, but I don't think she was shocked about the physical abuse, and she knew about the emotional abuse because it happened to her too. So like for example, we used to have, well, this was found later on in investigation and stuff, but we had trackers in our phones, because he bought us these dodgy phones off eBay.
Seriously?
Yeah, and my friends always used to take the piss out of me for having this like weird phone from eBay.
Is that a thing? You can do that? You can get trackers in your phones?
Well, it's like, it was the particular phone he bought. It was this like weird, like, I don't know, Chinese.
But
like,
for you it was a
phone.
phone and you were younger.
Yeah, and I
Give
was
me
like,
a phone,
yeah,
perfect.
yeah. And my sister also had one of those dodgy weird phones, so I think he had one in hers too. But like, it was so weird when I was younger, because I'd like, as you do as kids, you'd like sneak off somewhere with your mates, and I wasn't allowed down to this like bottom park, and it was always like, you can go up to the top park 'cause it's near us, but you can't go to the bottom park. And one day I like sneaked down, and then like 10 minutes I'd been there, he pulled up in his car and like grabbed me by the back of my like shirt and just dragged me into the car.
Really?
Yeah, and just knew where I was, and it happened like so many times where he just could see where I was, and I was like, there's something like weird here. And then another thing for me, he had a camera in my bedroom that would film me all the time.
Did you know that until after all?
So I realised at one point, I can't remember what age I was, but mid-teens, like 14 I think, I was like laying in bed, and I had like a TV like this on the wall, and
Yeah.
it had my computer attached to it, and I had a webcam on the desk.
Yeah.
You know how webcams,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
light comes on
Yes.
as it becomes active. So I was laying in bed and I just saw the little light come on. I was like, at first I thought I was being hacked or something, or
Yeah.
like someone was watching me through that. So I was like, that's weird, and I just like left it, and then it just kept happening. So one day I decided to like crawl under, even though it could see me anyway. And I just crawled under and turned my screen on, and then what I saw was my desktop, but it had the camera turned on. So like someone was using my computer remotely and looking
Which
through
you
my
can
camera
do
app.
that, can't you?
Yeah, so he had an app called TeamViewer on all the computers.
Yes, you can do that.
Yeah, and he would use
That's
that.
so scary.
Yeah, and he'd use that to watch me. But I couldn't like prove it was him. So one day I tried to like time it. So as soon I knew he was downstairs sat at on his chair, and I saw it come on. So I like jumped up and sprinted downstairs. And then on his phone, he had it on his phone as well. And I looked over and I could see my desktop on his phone. It was like that. And then that's when I knew that he'd been watching me. And then also in the investigation, they found like boxes of spy cams and stuff in his garage.
Do you think that he was doing more than just like within the household? Like, do you think there was more going on?
Yeah, so it like worries me where, because it was my bedroom. I got changed in there, like,
Yeah,
you know
of
what I mean?
course.
Like, it's a private space, and to think that all of that was recorded. I mean, I used to have to go and get changed in the bathroom after that, because I was like, this is...
And did you tell your mum that there was a camera in the room, or did you still?
No, I
because
was
at
still-
that point you were still being.
It was still part of the secret of
Yeah.
this
what was
other
that?
like side of my life
Yeah.
that I had to detach from. Yeah, it was a weird period that, because like I said, he started to change, and you could see his personality changing from this like live, bubbly, happy party guy who would always have friends round and stuff, and then we never had anyone round during this, like after I was sort of 12, 13. And
Why do you think that was?
I don't know what it was, whether it was that I'd grown out, he couldn't get his fix anymore, because
Yeah.
I wasn't the age that he was attracted to anymore. I think that's what it was. So I think there was like that frustration there, and he like projected it onto us from that point, because now he's got himself in this situation where he's got this family, and the only reason he got into the family was to sexually abuse me.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So that's my prediction of why.
And what was his relationship like with your mum at this point? Because obviously he's not. Did his behaviour change with her as well during this period?
Yeah, it was more grumpy and stuff like that with my mum.
Right.
But he kept up the character a little bit when she was around. It was more in front of me and my sister that he'd let it go a bit more.
That must have been so frustrating
Yeah.
for you to see this version of him where he's like a do-gooder.
It was crazy as well, like at church when he's at the front preaching about how to be a good person.
No.
And I have to sit and listen to it, and I'm like, but I know what you've done and who you
Yeah.
are. So it was so like infuriating
I
for me
bet
having
it
to
was.
watch. And everyone loved him as well. This is what really like pissed me off at the time.
I bet it did.
Because I'm like going to parties and stuff with him, and he's like, people think he's amazing, and people thought he was like,
Some sort
and
of
that's why he
god.
was so good
Yeah.
at what he did, because and I actually recently spoke to the leaders at the church where he used to be part
I
of.
saw that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and those people were just telling me their thoughts, like when they found out about it, they was just like, I couldn't even believe it. It was so like shocking to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they couldn't believe.
Do you
I
think
do
that was
that.
something that held you back from speaking out about it for so long?
Yeah, like his public character, I thought I wouldn't be believed. When I spoke out, I was in such a dark place. Like I was willing to take my own life instead of speaking to
Yeah.
anyone, just because of the feelings of shame. Like being a male abuse survivor comes with such a like range of different emotions, I feel, because you've got this pressure of having to be masculine,
Yeah.
and like my friends at school would always talk about, oh, if anyone tried to do that to me and that sort of thing. So there was that pressure there, and that was like, I didn't want anyone to know about it, to be honest. And even when I spoke out, I didn't want anyone to know about it, but I knew it had to just come out. So there was a range of different things as to why I didn't. But yeah, his public persona definitely like was a huge part of that, because he did so well at hiding things.
Yeah. And you spoke a little bit then, I wanted to touch on this, about your school friends. Did you remain like a normal child, do you know, when you're at school and with your friends? Did you have a fairly normal school life?
I would think so, yeah. And I always talk about in our training that we do, that like there's Ryans out there. And what I mean by that is, it's like they don't appear to be what you think an abused child looks like. They're not misbehaving, they're not quiet and reserved, they're not, you know, showing up dirty to school or have bruises on them. Like, it's not always like that. And that's exactly what I was. I feel like I was such a like background kid, those kids that you don't really take notice on, and those are usually, I think, the ones that get caught behind that and can't really
lost in
get
the
their
cracks
story
a little
out.
bit.
Yeah, because, you know, I was always quite an anxious kid anyway. Like, I was scared of war, but I was also scared of like social interaction and stuff. And I think all those things play perfectly well for his plan. You know what I mean?
Because you're so vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah. So at school, like, I was always having a laugh with my friends. Like, I was quite popular. I had a lot of friends, and I've had people message me, friends that I had at school, and they're like, I can't believe that this happened to you. Like,
and they never knew.
Yeah, like when a lot of them didn't know about what I was doing online until like newspapers wrote about it. Like, we had the local one write about the podcast that I did with Tom, and then like people just messaging me from school like, I had no idea like this happened to you. And then I'm kind of like, well, that's like why I do it. That's why I speak about it now, because there's kids out there in that same situation.
How do you feel about talking so vulnerably online? Because I think, like, when I've shared my story in certain ways, I find it quite difficult sometimes, and something that I always think about is like, oh my gosh, what if someone from school sees this? And it's this weird thing where I want to share my story to help others, but at the same time I've got this thing in the back of my mind where I almost don't want people to know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Do you get me?
Yeah, I'm completely the same with that. I think in my head, like, I convince myself, oh, I don't care. Like, they can know about it and it's fine. But then, like, when I see them,
it's kind of like this
like,
weird. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of like awkward, isn't it? It's also like when you start a new job. Like, I've recently started a new job, and
what
then
do you do?
like, so I'm a teacher,
Okay.
SEMH teacher, so it's a school for kids that have been excluded or kids that have experienced some sort of trauma.
Yeah.
And it's an alternative way of schooling. So the school itself is like a lake, but it's got cabins all around it.
Really?
And each kid has their own cabin, and then they have one teacher per kid as well. So you like have a little.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. It's brand new as well, so we're like finding our way with it. It's really interesting. But yeah, it's like when you start a new job and then they add you on socials, and then you're like, oh, I need to share this. I want to share this like thing I've just done, you know, to do with like my activism. But then they're all gonna read about it, and it's like now, even if you just Google Ryan Gatsby, it's like everything comes up at the top. So I'm like, everyone has a little search of the new co-worker, and that, don't they? They have like a little Google or a little like Facebook search. So yeah, it's like when I meet new people, that's the first thing. I'm like, oh, they're gonna read about that.
It's really interesting you're saying that, Ryan, because like you've been doing this for how many years?
Like 4, I think 5.
Yeah, quite a while, and you still feel like that. But then again, if you don't speak about it, then how can you possibly help anyone? There will be so many people suffering in silence.
That's the reason that why I do it. I always think to what I needed to hear from someone that was like me. So like, obviously I'm a young guy, and there's not many young people that speak about it. In the UK, we're getting better. I know there's Perry Power. I don't know if you've heard of Perry,
No.
but he does the same as me.
Okay.
And like Jeremy Indica. So there's more voices, but still not a lot. And when I was young, there wasn't anything.
No.
So when there's a young boy there who's probably like in his teens, I think that's such a hard period to go through if you've been sexually abused, because you don't, like I didn't want anyone to know, but if they can relate to someone else and see that, oh, they're still fine, they're, you know, no one bullied them or, you know,
Absolutely.
for their story.
And I think it's a generational thing as well, because, for example, there must be generations before us that it's definitely happened, but they'll never speak about it because of the generation. They just can't talk about mental health. So we need to be this new generation that talk about these things.
Yeah, exactly that. And the amount of people that message me, the most common message I get is not even from like young people who have just been through it or anything. It's from like people who are like in their 50s or 60s who message me and say, I've never spoke about it ever in my life and it's eating me apart, and thank you for what you're doing now because it may help people that will like me. And those are the ones where I'm like, no, actually this is important, because you do have days where you doubt it and you're like, is this even having an
impact? Is it worth it? Yeah, what's it doing?
Yeah, especially the way the social media is, like some of my videos that have gone like big, I think one of them's on like 23 million views or something like that. The comments on there are mostly like troll comments.
I'm intrigued. What might be an example of a troll comment that you would receive?
So like people would be like, you're gay, or you like to...
What is wrong with
people? It's so...
And it's being able to... Because I had a video with a podcast guest that's actually had to be taken down. It went viral on TikTok, and yeah, I mean, I've never had a viral video like that, and it was absolutely crazy. And like for every nice comment, there'd be like 10 awful comments, and I'd be going through and I'd have to delete them because I'd be like, the guest is gonna see that, and that's so awful.
Yeah, it is awful. It's the culture we live in, isn't it? It's like, it's such a strange space because on one hand, like in the UK, the left sort of liberal stuff is quite big, and there's certain things you can or can't say. But then on the other hand, online is like a free-for-all, and people think they can say whatever they want. So it's such a weird space, that time and space that we're living in. I see it all the time, like, some of the things I think, you must be like 10 years old to write that or something, like they must not understand the issue to write something like that.
They don't understand, or I think that they've never actually experienced something themselves, so they can't understand why someone would want to share, so they can't empathise.
Yeah, a lot of ones that I get that are not really trolly, but people will comment and say, like, this is for attention, or, oh, have you got enough views for this one? You know what I mean? Stuff like that.
Which, I think they're almost the ones that get to me the most, because it's like, you actually have no idea, like, yes, some people do things just for social media and likes, but social media is the platform that we can use to use our voice and to spread awareness.
That's the thing, and I always say, like, I would have rather have died than anyone know my story. So that's the effort that I put into sharing it to everyone.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Like, I have to push myself to share it. It's not something that I want to... I don't like getting... I hate when people try and, like, victimise. I don't know what the right word is, like...
I know exactly what you mean.
Where they're like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like,
exactly.
And when I see people from my past, that's the first thing they come and say. Obviously, it's with a good heart, and, like, they don't realise it. But it's quite like... don't feel nice. I prefer people to just, you know, be like, oh, it's great what you're doing on, you know, with the work you're doing.
Yeah.
But then, like, I don't want that kind of attention. So when people say I do it for that, it's kind of like frustrating, because you're like, it's not for that.
It's not for that, but I think that's social media, and people will always have their views.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
So I wanted to move on back onto sort of the end of when the abuse happened. Obviously, you said that you were thinking of taking your own life, and then you spoke out about it. What happened then after that period?
So I did a 4-hour recorded interview with the police, which was like telling all my story as much as I could.
And was that the first person, were the police the first people that you spoke to?
So the first person that I spoke to was, so I was about to take my own life in the bathroom, and my ex-girlfriend called me at the last minute.
Wow.
And then we sort of made a plan to go to the police station, which was next to where I worked. So I went to McDonald's at that point, and like I just went into work, like he dropped me off at work, so my plan was to go into work like normal and then walk around the police station. But when we got into the car, like we'd have like a bit of problems that morning because I didn't care anymore, so I was just saying whatever I wanted to him. So in the car, like we're nearly like pulling up and that, and he's like just like chanting on at me, saying the normal stuff, which was usually like, oh, you're acting like all depressive, like your mum's going to start getting suspicious, like, and ask you questions about why you're acting like this. And I was just like, getting really frustrated. And I said to him, the last thing was, I'm not going to keep your secret anymore. And it's the first time I'd ever said, like, your secret and been so open about it to him since, you know, the first time I ever confronted him about it. And he, like, instantly just went, like, that angry, like, sort of red mist that had come over him, and he tried to grab me, like, back into the car as I was leaving. And he was like, oh, stop it with this attitude, Ryan. And he was sort of screaming and saying, come back, get in the car. And I think, like, if I would have got into the car, I honestly feel like he would have seriously harmed me or, like, killed me.
Seriously?
Yeah, he was like, because things had happened, so, like, with the physical abuse, I don't go into it as much, because it's like, I feel like that's where a lot of my trauma lies, in the physical things. But, like, the worst thing that he did was he, like, knocked me unconscious fully, and then I woke up and he was holding a knife just here on the soft part of my chest. And he was like, and then would just instill into me, like, if you ever fucking say anything to anyone about this. And it was always when I was feeling low and I was acting a bit off, he would go into these, like,
was this in the
physical
house?
attacks. Yeah, so my mum would go out, like, on a Wednesday. So if he was going to confront me, I knew it would be on a Wednesday when she went out with it was my sister as well, they'd both go out together, so I knew I'd be alone with him for that time. So it was always at that point where he would threaten me or something would happen. So I knew he was capable of doing, like, seriously physical things.
Yeah.
And I'd seen his rage and, like, he'd threatened things like that before, so I thought, like, if he would have got hold of me and got me back into the car, where would he have took me, what would have happened? But luckily he didn't, and I just walked into work. And then I went into the toilet and I just, like, burst out crying. But it's because I felt, like, bad for him, which sounds really, like, messed up, doesn't it?
No, it
After
doesn't.
everything.
It doesn't. I kind of understand it. Yeah.
I felt, like, really sorry for him. And I thought to myself, like, look at everything he's gave us, and where would I have been
Without him?
Yeah, without all of that stuff, and the support he gave me through school and stuff. So I knew he would end up, either way he was going to be on his own with everything, I thought in my head. So that kind of ate me up, but I still went round anyway, because I knew that my ex was waiting for me to go into the police station. So we went in, and the first police officers I spoke to were just general, like, police officers, and one of them said, you might have to come back tomorrow because we don't know if we have the correct, like, staffing to deal with this. And I was like, I can't go home. Like, if I go home, I think, like, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
She was like, oh, all right then. Like, I just remember his attitude, the attitude of both, like, police officers were just, like, poor. But then I waited around for a little bit, and then these other police officers came and spoke to me, and they were, like, really nice. And then that, like, put me at ease, and then I was took to a different, the Mary Bullitt Centre in Doncaster to do my recorded interview. And then, yeah, I had to just, like I said, just share the deepest parts of my story, and then they said to me, we're going to arrest him now. And I was like, whoa, like, it felt like such a, like, relief.
Yeah. But was there still that part of you that was, like, felt sorry for him? And
yeah, and it felt very real as well.
Yeah.
It felt, because I'd been, like, sort of in this, like, bubble all day.
Yeah.
Of, like, because they didn't know yet that I'd told the police, but I knew they were about to know, and that's when it becomes, like, really real, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, really, like, panic, but also, like I said, that feeling of, like, oh, it's, like, finally over. So they went and arrested him, and then I wasn't there, but from what my mum's told me, they, like, knocked on the door and then asked for his name, and then went in, and he was, like, being a bit funny with him. And, like, sort of resisting it a little bit, and he, like, went upstairs to get a jumper, and because he was taking the mess, my mum thinks one of the police officers got a bit annoyed and then told my mum that it was me who had made the accusation.
Yeah.
So obviously my mum, like, lost it and then just started, like, screaming at him as he was being taken into the police car. And then, yeah, and then I stayed the night at my ex's house, and I knew that he was put on investigation, he was under investigation, so he was just out in the community near me, which was weird.
Were you scared?
I was scared. I thought he was going to come for me.
I bet.
I'd stay up, like, all night, like, what's going to, happen, or, like, if I was going to college, I'd always be, like, looking around in case he was there. And I know in that time he went on holidays and stuff because he was under investigation for two and a little bit years. So he went like on holiday to Thailand and stuff, and that concerned me when I found out about that, because it's like, why do wealthy middle class white
what's
men
he doing
to
when he's
Thailand
there?
on his own? So yeah, he did all these things, and then I like heard from people like that he called and stuff that he was telling people about what he'd done to me, but like a little spin on it, like a lie. So like people in the local community were coming to him saying like, because he's called Andrew. Andrew called me and told me like these things, and then obviously that were evidence for us because he's admitted to, even though it's not fully true, he's admitted to doing something. That's a crime. So anyway, the investigation went on, and then I remember one day the police called me and said, "Oh, we need to speak with you like as soon as possible." And this was like a week after they told me he'd received his charges, which is like you get a letter through the post with your list of charges that you're being accused for. And anyway, so I got home, and then it was weird because the original police officer that was head of the case was there, and also the new one. So they'd switch like halfway through, so I thought, why is the original one there? Like, there's something big that's happened. And they came in and they told me that he'd taken his own life. So I was like, I kind of thought of it as a possibility when she spoke to me on the phone, but I like didn't think it would actually be real. So I was just like so confused. Wow. And like I remember I was like froze, and then they went, and then I just burst out crying because again I thought of all the memories.
Yeah, like how did that make you feel? Because it's like a relief, but then also, because at the end of the day, as weird as it is, like you probably loved him at one point, and like he was, like you said, he was the father figure that you never had. Yeah,
and I think why I always read it is like I grieved for the person that he could have been, not for the person that he actually was.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was like absolutely shocked what had happened, and then as it came out, like he'd been, like he was a bit of an alcoholic when he was at home anyway, like, but apparently his like alcoholism got worse, and then obviously with receiving his charges, it then like took his own life.
And how was your mum through all this?
My mum, I think she was just as puzzled as me. Like, I just think she didn't expect it, like, just shocked. She didn't, like, grieve for him or anything. She kind of she didn't, like, she had a lot of hatred towards him. She didn't have that same, like, complex, conflicting thing that I had in, like, my younger brain. So she was shocked in that, but I think she was more trying to support me. But, yeah, it was a weird time.
So what did your life look like after that? How old were you, 18 at that point?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think now. Yeah, so I would have been, around 18, maybe 19. And yeah, my life was good at the time. Like I was in a really good place. When I first got out of abuse, I struggled massively with my mental health, and like I starved myself. I went into hospital because I weighed something like, I weighed like 49 kg or something like that. Like I was like.
Do you think really you had like an eating disorder of some sort?
Yeah, I never had a official diagnosis on it, but it's kind of like what I think now, because it's like I didn't eat because I felt I didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
That's the main thought that I had in my head, and it was like food was disgusting to me because I was disgusting if I ate it, and like I wanted to punish myself, I think.
Was that for the guilt that you felt?
Yeah, and it was kind of like, I've done this to myself. It was like I was having so many dark, like weird thoughts at the time.
Yeah.
And I also developed like health anxiety really bad. That's like the thing today that I still struggle with the most.
They actually say that children who experience trauma, the thing that they will most likely have in adulthood is health anxiety.
Really? I didn't know that.
Because I had therapy recently, and oh my gosh, health anxiety is like taken over my life for so long.
Yeah.
And she was the first. I've been to lots of different therapists and psychologists, and she was the first one that was like, that is unhealed trauma, health anxiety.
See, for me, it's like it's been such a problem even before I got out of abuse. I realised, because I was obsessed with the thought I had a brain tumour when I was like 15.
Don't even go there, because that was the reason why I've actually just been to see someone again, because I was absolutely this has only been over the past month.
Yeah.
Like, I was convinced that I had like days to live and I had a brain tumour.
Yeah. I honestly, I've been there like 5 or 6 times, or like since I was like 15. So like for me, it was like such a weird symptom because when I'd go like that, I had a pain here.
Yes.
So I'd spend my day going like that.
Yeah. It's
Then I
like
went
a
to
compulsion
doctors.
almost.
Yeah,
kinda.
I went to doctors and I was like, when I do this,
Sorry.
my head hurts.
It's funny, isn't it? Like, you're just there all day. It's funny because I've actually done weirder things than that.
It is funny. And like, it's one of those like long running jokes, but the doctor actually said to me like, don't do that then.
Yeah, literally. It's probably going to hurt if you're doing that all
And
day,
then
yeah.
just tried to reassure me that I don't have a brain tumour, but I still
Yeah.
thought I did.
Of course.
And then I thought I had lymphoma for 3 or 4 months.
Okay, yeah.
So that was I kept going like this all day,
Yeah.
feeling my lymph nodes.
I do this, yeah,
checking
all the
for
time,
lumps.
yeah.
And then I went back to the brain tumour, and then like loads of other things.
What's the
Cancer at
weirdest
one
thing
point.
that you think you've convinced yourself that you've had?
So I had this weird like bruising on my back, and I thought it was leukemia. But it was just from where I was doing like sit-ups at the gym, I realised over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it weird? Because like I'll get a headache, for example, and then I'm convinced this must be a brain tumour. And the therapist that I went to see recently, she was like, maybe you could look at like all the other normal things. Maybe you've not had enough water.
Yeah.
Maybe you've been staring at a screen for too long. Like there's stress.
Do you like create? I don't know if it's just me, but do you create little storylines in your head? Like, do you like sort of think, oh, this is gonna happen, and I'm gonna get diagnosed,
yes,
and then
in bed at night.
yeah,
And I'll do this whole story, and then I'll be like, how my life's gonna change. Because the thing that I had recently was is it MS?
MS, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? Like,
I thought I had ALS as well.
yeah,
that's one of
I'll be
mine.
28 years old and I've got MS. What am I gonna do? My life's gonna change, and like, how will I get back from Australia if I find out in Australia that I've got it? And like this, I've done it. And then like 3 days later, I look back and that's why it's weird because you can laugh at it after.
Yeah.
But at the time, it's so real.
It's so scary. Yeah, it's like for me, my recent one. Within the last 2 years, that's been absolutely the worst battle with it I've had.
Yeah.
It's been about heart failure.
Yeah.
So my granddad died of heart failure, like in his 50s, and like as soon as I like learned that and researched that can be genetic, I've been absolutely obsessed.
Yes.
And I've paid for a private heart scan. I've paid for private like ECGs. I've been and seen a consultant cardiologist. This was recent, like I think 2 weeks ago. I saw the consultant cardiologist, and she was like talking to me about my test results and said nothing abnormal has
There's
been
absolutely
found.
nothing, yeah.
And I was like, but could I have heart failure?
Yeah.
And she was like, no, and just laughed at me. It was such a like funny appointment because she was like just saying to me like, you're fine. And I was like, but what about this? But what about this?
We're literally the same person.
Yeah.
Like on that topic, just last thing for that, I went for an eye test recently because I thought I was going blind.
Yeah.
And I've had an eye twitch, which is actually because I've been so stressed recently. That's why I've had the twitch. So I said to my mum, I was like, I need to go because I think I've got eye cancer. So this was literally 3 days ago. So I went to Meadowhall, went to the opticians, and I'm sat there, and my mum knows what I'm like, and I'm like, Mum, what if they tell me that I've got eye cancer? And she was like, they're probably not going to tell you that, Emily. And I was like, but what if they do? So I had all the tests, and then I went into the room, sat down, and they've got like the pictures of your eyes on the screen, and I'm like trying to look for cues that she's going to tell me that something's wrong.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, your eye health's fine. And I was like, you sure? You sure that there's not something wrong? Because I've got this twitch. And she was like, yeah, that's usually because you're stressed. And like, but I'd convince myself.
You do, yeah. It's
So
like my dad's, like my biological dad, I speak to him a lot now. And he gets so annoyed with me because he knows like he was a medic in the army and stuff, so he knows about like sort of basic ECG stuff and that. And I'll just send him like my ECG, like, can you see anything wrong with this? Or I'd like email. I think I've been blocked from emailing the cardiology department at Johnny because I email all the time, like, yeah. But it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So obviously health anxiety's kind of like been a subsequent to that.
Yeah.
But have you, I guess after the abuse and everything, have you ever seen anyone like a psychologist or?
So I got counselling, talk therapy straight after I came out. So I had that for a few months. I'm debating going and doing is it EMDR?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm
Apparently
debating
that is
doing that.
amazing for health anxiety, by the way.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Yeah, because a friend of mine who's also a survivor has recommended that to me and said like she's fine now and she feels like
life changing apparently. Yeah.
So it's mainly for like the health anxiety. That's the biggest issue that I have as an effect from the abuse. I think.
Which is interesting because I suffer with it too, and apparently it is unhealed trauma.
Yeah.
So sorry, I was about to ask you something and I forgot now.
Sorry.
Yeah. So other than the therapy, is there anything that you do in your day-to-day life that you think helps you with the healing process?
So for me, like physical exercise is like the best, like makes me feel the best. So I do like CrossFit, I've done like jiu-jitsu and MMA and stuff like that for years. Running, I feel like running's so like healing.
Yeah.
And I think just doing the page is like a bit of a like journaling type thing for me, because like if I'm recording a video and stuff, I'm getting my thoughts and feelings out, and I know it's helping others, and that makes me feel good. It's sort of like a fix, I guess. Sometimes it feels like I have to resolve the brokenness of that time. So through the work I do, it kind of feels like I'm fixing that, which sounds strange, but
that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'd say those things like just exercise and just speaking about the issue on platforms and like writing posts about it is really helpful.
And you have a abuse awareness course and prevention pathways, is that right?
Yeah.
So do you want to explain a little bit about those?
Yeah, so the Be Abuse Aware course is something I've worked on with my friend Mike. So Mike was actually my youth worker when I was a kid.
Really?
And so we have this dynamic where he's the sort of youth worker that missed the signs and I'm the survivor.
Wow.
So we use that dynamic there to educate youth workers and people who work with children and young people
amazing.
On the signs. On the signs and hidden sort of things about child sexual abuse that aren't covered in traditional safeguarding training. So we have like 3 sections, and the main section is Be Active, and we give strategies and ways that people who care for children and young people can start finding the right phrasing, like encourage disclosures or create safe spaces for disclosures to happen if they're going to happen. And I'm sort of adapting it for parents now, because I think if you can create such a safe environment in your home where you have such strong relationships, it can combat someone trying to ruin that. Do you see what I mean? And I always speak about, so the most important thing for me, for parents and people who work with children and young people to do, is to build a community around a child who's giving them anti-abuse messaging, and frequent recurrent spaces where the child can come and speak about things that are affecting them. And I always say, like, what's the problem? There's no harm in doing it, so everyone should do it, because it might not be sexual abuse that they're facing, it might be a gender identity issue, or it might be a mental health issue. So yeah, some of our activities are about how to create those in your family or in your groups, and the children that you work with.
And where do you do these courses? Is it in schools, workplaces?
So at the minute we've done just youth workers, but we're branching out to I'm quite passionate about religious spaces, so churches. So obviously I went and spoke at my old church, and I've done a couple of others where I've gone and spoke to them now. So yeah, it's just religious spaces, anywhere where there's professionals working with children and young people. And then obviously I'm interested in doing the parents courses, and I've done a couple virtually. So I'll meet with parents online and just give them our presentation.
That's amazing.
And talk through my advice, I guess, on how to create a safer home.
And how do you think that friends and family could support someone who is struggling with trauma, or maybe they've just spoken out like you did about sexual abuse?
Yeah. I think a huge thing is not making it their identity. Like, if they're coming to you with an issue, or if you can see that they're depressed and not leaving the room, I would always say, don't say, oh, is this like what happened to you, or like bring it back to that. I think the way that you can do it is let them be seen by you, let them feel seen and held by you. Sometimes it can be hard to do that, especially when they might reject you or push you away, which can happen. I think just being there to listen and physically there for them and empowering them and telling them that, reminding them of the things they've accomplished, even how big and small they are, because that's something that helps me. If I'm having a down day or week or month, and people close to me say like, look at what you've done, like look at what you've gone through and where you are now, or just look at how you progressed from this to this, and that can really make me rewire my brain and sort of remind me that I can get up and do something.
Yeah.
So I'd probably just say that, yeah.
And are some of your friends from school now your friends, like that you see?
That hang out with, yeah. I do have a couple that know me from school that I'm still hanging out with.
Yeah, and what about your sister in all of this?
Yeah, she's like been through so much as well, my
Absolutely.
sister. So like with the emotional abuse, she was like bullied by him every day. She was called fat and like mocked and stuff by him, and I think it's really affected her. She has health anxiety, and she she's just been through a bit of a wild ride the last couple of years. A part of her story is that like she was groomed by someone who was close to our family, not the same, like a different guy who was friends with our stepdad, and when this all came out, like my stepdad brought the guy to the house to let them have a conversation about it instead of like informing the police. So really traumatic for her, like
wow.
Absolutely awful situation for her to be in, very much victim blaming that happened there, and I always defend my sister now whenever this comes up, and how could that have happened, and how could so many adults have been present to watch something like that happen.
And I think that leans in quite nicely to what I wanted to discuss around the recent media exposure on the UK grooming gangs.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Because I know that you've been kind of actively posting on social media about it, and I didn't even hear about it, so I've been kind of reading about it through you, really.
Yeah, see, I'm quite I like to read about like politics and stuff anyway. I mean, I'm not like well educated on it. I'm just like, let me read. I just read an article now and again. I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I started seeing it pop up in like local news, but I knew about it from ages ago from documentaries that I watched and just some research that I did. So I followed Sammy Woodhouse for ages, who's a victim of it, and like we've spoken and stuff. So I knew about the whole situation and how like big it was, and I'd watched documentaries. There was a documentary made by a controversial figure. I don't want to say his name because it can cause your videos get taken down.
Okay. I think I probably know.
Yeah. He was not a good guy, and in my views are completely opposite to his about pretty much everything.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
But he was one of the first to expose it, other than I think it was one of the newspapers anyway. So that's where I'd heard from it as well. I'd watched them documentaries. So anyway, when it all started to pop up recently, I'm like, well, why has this happened? And then I realised it's because on Twitter there'd been like that thing with Elon Musk sharing this person's other documentary about a different topic, and Elon Musk has been very vocal about how much he hates the UK government and everything that's been taking place, and the grooming gang scandal. And to me it feels like something we've had a million times in the UK, which is we've got an issue that's happened due to systemic failures within the system, but we've made it political, and the focus isn't even fixing the issue, it's about the politics behind it.
Yeah.
So we're never going to get to the root cause of the issue ever.
Being politically correct is more important than actually dealing with the issue,
And that's the reason the whole scandal happened, and it is disgusting that local services failed victims. And occasions happened. I read that girls were going to the police because they'd been raped by these grooming gangs, and then the police wouldn't get back to them, and then they'd be raped again by the grooming gangs. And like this happened to thousands of girls. Like in Rotherham, I can't remember the name of the report, but they found it was 1,400 plus girls that had been affected by it. So like huge numbers, and all covered up because of fears of community tensions. And it's like...
Do you ever
insane.
feel disheartened when you read those things about someone who's trying to advocate for something so important, and then you see that the government are making these sort of moves and they're not really doing anything about it?
Yeah, it is really disheartening, and I think about every victim that were involved in that and how their lives have been affected, and this issue can really, like, if they don't have the right support, can really ruin someone's life.
Absolutely.
So the numbers are huge, and when I heard that they weren't going to do a second inquest, which is recent, so they did a first one in 2022 into what happened, but nothing's really been fixed, because I know people who have been sexually assaulted in Rotherham and face those things and have the same issues of not being followed up or not having the right support.
Seriously, it's crazy.
So it's like, well, clearly nothing's been done, because Rotherham's one of the main areas that it happened. Rotherham, Telford, Oxford, Hull, you know, all these areas. I feel like there's nothing that's really changed, and there's not been more resources put into it. It's just exactly how it was. And instead, what the government's doing and Keir Starmer's doing is they're using that figure, the controversial figure, as like, look at them. Like, they look at everything they've done before and focusing on how bad that or how wrong that person is, instead of saying, right, let's address the actual issues. Let's actually look at the issues and why it's happened. So it's frustrating. It's like they have an excuse of not to follow it up just because the person that, one of the people that brought it to light was such a controversial figure. So yeah, it's frustrating.
And what do you think would be your like dream in terms of your advocacy work?
Yeah, so for me, I'm in the process of setting up a CIC, which is Separate to Prevention Pathways.
Do you want to explain what that means for anyone who might not understand what CIC is?
So it's a community interest company, so it's like the middle ground between a charity and a limited company. So what is it, like 70, I think it's like 65% of the profits go back into the company. So it's not a company set up to make money. No. It's a company set up to make difference almost, in the community. So what I want to do with that is set up, similar to where I work now, alternative educational provisions for children specifically who've experienced some sort of trauma. And within that, instilling growth mindsets and using stories and examples where people can see that they can make something of themselves despite what's happened. Because I think there's that self-fulfilling prophecy where they think, oh, this has happened to me, so
I can't ever be successful.
I can't ever be normal. And I want to like sort of take that away and I want people to aim high, because I think that's the way to combat it, isn't it? It's, for me, when I'm working hard and I know I'm making progress, that makes me feel better all around, like in my mental health wise. And if I know I'm not quite doing the best I can, that's when the things from the past affect me the most. And
also having like a team of people together who are all going through the same thing and having that community feel, rather than feeling like I've got to go through this on my own.
And modern education is like one size fits all, like the approach to behaviour.
Absolutely.
Some kids, like, even when you talk about like kids with ADHD or autism, there's a certain way that you deal with those types of behaviours that I've had to learn working with kids, you know, with those conditions professionally, and it's not the way that we do it in current mainstream settings. It's like C1, C2, oh, you're out. And we know how much of an impact autism or ADHD can have on your concentration and just the way that you process information. And it's the same with like trauma, even though it's not as spoke about. I think it can really impact your concentration and everything like that. And it's like I struggle with depersonalisation as well.
Me
at
too.
school,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, at school I really struggled to like take information in because I was so like
don't even
out of it.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the. I always say that is one of the scariest things I think I've ever experienced, because
100%.
you genuinely feel like you're not in your own body. Like, it is crazy.
And when something affects your actual consciousness, you're like, what is going on? Because it's your experience of the world, isn't it? I remember the first time it happened, and I just looked down at my body.
No, don't. And your hands are like
look so weird. But you can't figure out why.
Do you know, it used to happen when I was driving a lot. I don't know if you've had it when you're driving before.
I used to get it from driving lessons. I had to tell my instructor that I had it because I kept freaking out.
Everything looks like a bit like a cartoon almost, doesn't it? Yeah, it's really scary.
Yeah.
I
So that massively affected my like concentration levels at school and stuff. And if kids are experiencing that, I want to create spaces where they can feel like safe and they can take time out and it doesn't have to be so structured.
Yeah.
So that's my dream in the long run. We're starting up as like holiday clubs and stuff like that. To teach like key life skills and mindfulness and
I love that so much.
yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
that's the initial plan, to do holiday clubs and let it grow. So yeah.
I had a question about your relationships since this has happened.
Yeah.
Like, obviously you mentioned you had a girlfriend before. Do you think it's affected like how you build and form relationships romantically?
Yeah, I think it has in some aspects. I think like with my ex-partner who was with me through, like she knew me while I was living at home and then I was with her for like 6 years. But with her, she used to sort of act disgusted whenever I'd talk about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like, I told her about one experience that happened that I've never told. I've not shared it on any platform, never told anyone, really. So, I like shared this with her and she was like, oh, really, that happened? So like, oh, I don't really know how I feel about that. And like, yeah, and those sorts of, just that one time changed my whole perception of her, and that's what kind of led to the breakdown of the relationship. And like that's the importance of how you respond to survivors as well. Even if like a story does make you uncomfortable, just be cautious on how you respond to it because it can be like deeply impacting. But in terms of ways it's affected me, I've noticed. Well, I did notice in the past, like in that relationship, so I had like trust issues. Even though I wouldn't vocalise it, I would kind of think that there was some sort of lie somewhere, and I had to find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like what would ring around in my head.
And I guess as well, if you've told someone who at that point was probably one of the closest people to you about your like deepest, darkest secret, and that's how they responded, then probably made you question whether you'd ever want to tell anyone else again because of that response.
Yeah, massively. I've never, that particular experience, I've never shared it with anyone else since, other than my counsellor earlier on, but like...
Because it's almost like a judgmental response, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like her own ignorance to the issue.
Which is the problem, I think, widely across the world, is this ignorance towards taboo forms of like mental health. Like if we talk about depression or anxiety or even eating disorders, it's like people are kind of more open to hearing about that, but when it's something that's more taboo, let's say, people don't want to know about it.
Yeah, that's true.
And they almost like cancel it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, massively. And like I said, that one thing impacted the rest of the relationship because I wouldn't want to be near her then. Like it was, really
difficult.
But then like in my relationship that I'm in now, she's called Elodie. She's really like accepting and like will want me to talk about things if I want to, and just she's a teacher as well and she's worked with kids like I have, and she just has that understanding of that it isn't the kid's fault. And you know, it's easy to say how could you let it happen for that long, because that's something else that my ex would say to me. And it's like or she'd say things like, oh, when I was younger I knew about that. It's like,
you know about it but you don't, but that's very different to like
oh, of course. And people, this is why I speak about it, because people don't get the process of grooming and how like it really gets in your head, and it's just your lived, it's like your life, it just becomes normal. So I hate that comment of, because it's another comment I got online a lot, like, why don't you just tell someone? It's like, well, I'm battling all these emotions that I spoke about, and I was battling like him being my dad and wanting to protect him, and then I was also battling the fear of not being believed, and so many layers to it. Yeah,
and like you said, like you felt, you know, an element of you felt loved by him and probably trusted him in a weird sort of way. So it makes sense.
And I think going back to like making, you know, the alternative education setting, I found that finding some sort of purpose and meaning in my story to be very healing. Because I used to see it as such a waste of my childhood, and I used to say things like I never had a childhood, and like what a waste of time. But because I found purpose through doing the things I do, and not just that, I find purpose in it by it's giving me resilience to get through such challenges within my mental health or professional challenges. It gives it serves a purpose
Yes,
then, and then
Yeah.
when you're feeling low and you're thinking, well, what is all that? You can actually say, no, it's given me something, and it's a bit of a controversial
No, I
statement.
completely agree.
And I get when I say that, I get some.
Yeah.
Because
Nobody should
again,
have to go
everything's like
through it and all the rest of it.
everything's like made political. And it's
But
so
I
difficult
completely
on the online
agree.
space with that.
Because I think I always feel that with me when I'm experiencing some of the things I've experienced. When I look back at the things I've experienced and the way it affects me now in adulthood, and I'm like, I wish I never went through that. But then, like, on the flip side, like you said, to turn it into a positive, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't be so like strong and resilient, and I wouldn't be able to help people through sharing my story. So I think, it's probably like a really strange thing when you come out and say, part of me is kind of not glad it happened, but like I'm not, like I don't look back and think I wish that never happened, because I wouldn't be the person I am today. I think that actually shows bravery and strength,
100%.
to be able to change that negative experience, because I think a lot of us can look at our past and think that it has to make us who we are, and actually, like, you can change, like, you don't have to focus on your past. You can use your past and be like, how can I use that to become the person, instead of holding on to it and like letting it control your entire life.
That's the thing. It's like, sometimes it's a choice in it on how you let things.
Yeah, exactly. Everything in life.
Yeah.
So, the last question, anyway, I've loved speaking to you, Ryan, is advice. So, if there was somebody listening right now who's experienced similar trauma, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give them?
So I'd literally give them the finding purpose and meaning or value in yourself and your story. Like I said, like that is the main healing part for me. Another thing is trust the process of healing. Like trust that process, and sometimes in life when you're in those dip bits, it's just about gritting your teeth. And there's not enough talk about that. Like it's like all sort of softy around dealing with challenges and stuff. But I think sometimes you do just have to grit your teeth, and it is going to be rough. But you know that that's part of the process, and eventually there is another side. There is the other side, and just using what you have around you. If you have people you can talk to, like I know how uncomfortable it makes me feel to bring up this topic around my family. Like it's so makes me cringe. Or even just talking about mental health struggles, it makes me have that horrible feeling inside, ugh.
Yeah.
But after I do it, and after I've committed to talking to someone about it, it's such a weight lifted off. And sometimes you really have to just power through that just to feel better. It's like when people go through therapy and they're like, oh, I've got to go to therapy today, or I've got to go to counselling or whatever. It can feel a bit of a chore because you know how it's going to make you feel actually bringing it up. But then afterwards, I don't know about anyone else, but when I used to go and go and talk about things, I used to feel like a bit just a little bit lighter. So yeah, I'd probably go with that.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. That's
No,
amazing
thank you.
advice. I've loved speaking to you, and I will leave all the links in the description for anyone who wants to go and check out your multiple different pages. You have a page for Friendship Pathways, don't you?
We do, yeah.
So I'll leave some links in there, but you're incredible, and thank you so much.
No, thank you, thanks for inviting me.
Yay!